Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Every Other Friday Off. Today we're going to be installing a front-mounted intercooler as well as the ATM Fenderwell intake. I try to keep my videos as short and to the point as possible, so I apologize, there's a lot involved in this one and it's going to take a while. I also make a point to test everything I do. I'm going to add that testing on to the next video, so this is more of a how-to, and if you're curious about the test results, that'll be in the next video. Shiny speed parts. So what are we doing here? We're adding a little bit more cooling capacity to the intake air, but we're simplifying the heck out of that charged circuit. The stock intercooler circuit is very complex, with piping connections all over the place. Tons of leak points, tons of bends, tons of restrictions. A simpler, more direct, less volume circuit is going to be quicker to spool. And as an added bonus, pulling the intercooler out of the fender well allows me to put an intake into the fender well, which lets me get a nice cool ambient air. It's my general opinion that a lot of the aftermarket intakes for most cars are pure smoke and mirrors. But on this car, being able to skip pulling air directly over the hot as heck engine seems like a big gain. So let's get to it. You want the car up in the air, either jack stands or a lift if you're fortunate. And the skid pan needs to come out with 6 10mm bolts. We'll actually be salvaging a couple bolts that you can use for your skid pan to finally replace the ones you've lost. So bonus. Front 2 wheels need to come out. We'll be basically living inside those wheel wells for a lot of this modification. And now it's going to be time to go after that front bumper. Underneath there are 3 T27 or T30 screws to be removed. After that, there are 2 Phillips head screws at the outside underneath, one on each side. After that, there are 3 Phillips head screws in each wheel well holding the fender liner skirt. And at the top of each fender liner is this beauty. That's a captive nut with a T27 or T30 screw underneath it holding the bumper. You can pull back the fender liner and actually tuck it out of your way in order to give yourself access to get a tool in there to get after that screw. On the driver's side, inside the passenger well, you'll need to disconnect the fog lights. On both sides, the side indicator light comes out with a quarter turn. And on both sides, the big green plug is for the daytime running lights and it needs to come out. Up top, there are 4 T30 bolts to be removed. I don't have a good holder for my Torx bit, so I'm going to drop it there. And I'm probably going to drop it again. And let's see if I remember to hold it this time. Oh, I got one. And one more time, no. Moment of truth, time to remove the bumper. There are 4 plastic tabs on each side. Lifting up and out seems to be the key to getting it off without breaking those tabs. Be brave. Mine stayed intact, but if anybody in the comments wants to recommend a good quick release mechanism, I'm all for it. I don't want to do this a lot. Go ahead and remove the headlights. It's only 3 bolts on each side, and it'll make your life a lot easier. If you're doing the intake, the passenger side's not optional anyway. There's a pretty easy to do plug on the back of the headlights that lets them pop right off. And now I'm going to loosen all the bolts involved with the crash bar just to give myself a little bit more room. In a moment, we're going to be opening up the intercooler circuit. I have a subscriber that while he was doing the boost leak mod, decided to use his air filter box as a parts tray. Everything in this circuit that we're opening up leads directly to either your engine or your turbo. One 10-cent vacuum cap cost my subscriber his turbo. Don't let the same thing happen to you. So let's open it up. I'm starting with the line to each intercooler on the turbo side. It's a hose clamp on the intercooler side and a wire clip on the pipe side. All the wire clip fittings come off a lot easier than the hose clamp fittings, so start with those. Each intercooler has a duct that's retained with a single bolt up near the top of the intercooler. There's a plastic air dam underneath the radiator that we'll be getting rid of. 1 bolt on the passenger side and 2 bolts on the driver's side. The driver's side top intercooler mount is also where your horn is located. We've got to get the bracket off to get the intercooler out, but we'll be putting it right back. With the bracket out of the way, we'll get ready to remove the intercooler. First, we need to disconnect the pipe on the engine side. It's a hose clamp connection and can be a little bit of a bear to get off. I ended up removing the intercooler off of its perch to give me a little bit more twistability, and it popped right off. With the intercooler out of the way, we can reconnect the horn bracket. Passenger side intercooler pops off the same way, but we don't need to keep the bracket. And this gives you a little bit of an idea of the increased cooling area you get from a front-mounted intercooler. Time to get after some of those pipes. I'm going to remove the last hose underneath on the passenger side. The hose clamp is of course in an awkward position, so I'm going to use a ratcheting wrench to get it broken loose and spun around to a place where I have a chance to remove it. I was able to wiggle mine free, but we're not reusing any of this, so do what you gotta do. The driver's side hose comes off a little bit easier than the passenger side. Long extensions are your friend. Let's take a fly through and look at all the support bracketry we need to take off. There's a bolt that I accidentally removed while I'm doing my skid plate. There's a nut hiding right behind there. And there's one more hiding right behind here. Follow the hose up towards the turbo, and there's a clip that needs to come out. It's a pretty tight reach. Over on the engine side hard pipe near the top, it's the same clip that needs to be taken out of the way, and once that's out of the way, you should be able to start pulling the pipe and wiggling its way free. There are two bolts on the upper radiator support on either side. I'm going to take them out, and that's going to allow me to pull the whole radiator assembly forward and up a couple inches to give me room for the fastener I've got to go after next. I'm also going to remove all 8 bolts that hold the crash bar and remove the crash bar to give myself even more room to work. Finally, I'm going to loosen up all the bolts on the little frame horns. These appear to be made out of the same plastic as the armrest. I sure hope they're a lot stronger. Now I can pull the whole assembly up and out, which will give me just a little bit more clearance between the turbo piping and the radiator. Time to practice my redneck to Italian and disconnect my Magnete Morelli ECU. That's Ferrari parts right there. Pull the yellow tab, then lift up on the connector and pull out of the way. Then we can disconnect our battery terminals and tuck them out of the way. Ultimately, we're trying to get to underneath the battery tray where the charge pipe lives. At the front of the battery is a keeper that needs to be loosened or removed. Then the whole battery can come on out and get out of the way. One nut inside a recessed pocket and 2 bolts hold the battery tray down. We can also separate the ECU ground from the negative terminal. Hold on to that nut and don't lose it. There are various plastic snaps that hold cables to the battery tray. These need to be popped out. For the back ones, I like using a punch to punch them through. And on the side, where you can get a screwdriver or pliers as a wedge, it's a lot easier to use that. With all the cabling removed from the battery tray, you can go ahead and wiggle it on out of your engine compartment. Remove the hose clamp from the charge pipe to hose connection. Then you can go ahead and remove the flexible hose from the charge pipe. I definitely had to use a flathead to break the bead on this one. Alright, back to piping removal. Halfway down the hose from the turbo is a stud that is an anchor point for a support for that piping. Getting at this guy is why we moved the radiator just a couple inches out of the way. It's the last jigsaw piece in the puzzle we have to undo to get the original intercooler circuit out of the way. Remember how extensions are your friend? There's one more hose clamp at the bottom of the turbo. You can get to it by shooting through the slot between the radiator and the radiator support. And that's it, one stock intercooler circuit removed. Out of all those parts, we're going to save exactly one piece, and it's the hose section that connected to the turbo. The orientation of the new pipe relative to the OEM one should be pretty obvious. You just need to make sure that the brackets are aligned the same way. The hose clamp on this one is one of the annoying one-time use ones. Get destructive. Pay careful attention to the orientation of the hose on the OEM pipe. There's a notch that interacts with a pin on the turbo. You're going to want to try to match that when you reinstall on the new pipe. New hose clamp goes on. You don't need to tighten it all the way down at this point. You're still going to be able to get to it, and you need some adjustability later on. The silicone elbow has a long side and a short side, and in this case it's the short side that's going to go up against your replacement pipe. With the replacement pipe and bracket laying flat on a table, the elbow wants to be pointing straight up in the air, but leave that hose clamp loose because this joint is going to need tweaking. And let's get this slapped on the car. Elbow side down, the pipe slides in from the bottom and plugs into the turbo. And that's all I can get done today. Let's take another look at the routing. There's the pin and the notch. And we travel down. That is where the bracket's going to tie into the stud and be renutted. The pipe passes in front of the crossbar, and your elbow ends up just underneath. Let's get the charge side piping together. I'm using a flared silicone piece because I have a manual transmission. Automatic, my understanding, is used as a straight piece. Big end goes towards the charge pipe, and I took a guess here on where to position the hose clamp. I probably should have put it with the fastener pointing down so that you could work the hose clamp from underneath, but you'll see it when you get there. On the bottom is just a straight silicone coupling with 2 hose clamps. You don't have to put them both on at once, and you can leave them loose. Unfortunately, you really don't get to find out whether or not you did this part right until it's time to put the bumper back on, so expect tweaking to happen. You do want to remember to put the big hose clamp up on the charge pipe side, because it would be painful to put it on later. You can feed the shiny new pipe up through the bottom to get it up onto the charge pipe. At first I thought this thing went up and down vertically, but you actually want to kick it over towards the driver's side about as far as you can. Don't tighten up the hose clamp yet. You're going to want to do that after the intercooler's on so you can see what angle that wants to be sitting at. I've got my wrench coming in from approximately where the headlights were, my thumb coming in through the engine bay, and you can just get a tool to snug up this hose clamp on the charge pipe so that it stays in place. This is why I thought the hose clamps ought to be fasteners pointing down. That seems to be the easiest access for the tool, so I flipped them about 90 degrees for my first guess. On the pipe to silicone piece here, I think you can go ahead and tighten it all the way up. Last pipe. It's got a short side and a long side. The long side goes towards the charge pipe. If you've got the angle right on the previous pipe that we put in, then the bottom of this new pipe will be approximately horizontal. Make sure you've pushed it in far enough to get a good grip with your hose clamp. And don't forget your hose clamp, or you'll be taking it out and putting it back again. So let's look at that routing. We've got the charge pipe out to the sweeping bend. It points down and out to plug into our last pipe, which ducks around the radiator bracket and ends up where the intercooler will one day be. Time to reinstall the bumper loosely. We need it because we're going to hang the intercooler from it, but there's no reason to tighten it all the way up yet. The intercooler will end up pretty close to the air conditioning condenser, especially on the upper corner on the passenger side. So I'm going to install a small piece of silicone weather stripping so that any rubbing there is not metal to metal. There's a million different types of shapes and thicknesses at the hardware store, but I went pretty small and kept my strip length pretty short because race car. Simplify and add lightness. Finally, the awesomeness is happening. Time to install the intercooler. I'm using a fancy scissor lift, but it's not that heavy. You can do it by hand. But the two welded on bosses line up with the holes that are already in your crash bumper and line up with the big bolts and washers supplied in the kit. Now's a good time for a special shout out, by the way, to NGen Performance for putting together this kit. It's a great kit and saves me quite a bit of money over the ATM version. He has an excellent YouTube channel, and he actually has an install video for his intercooler kit. I almost didn't make this because his is just as good or probably better, but I wanted to show it in conjunction with the ATM Fenderwell intake. After this much horrible voiceover work though, I'm starting to regret that decision. We can go ahead and lock down the intercooler to our crash bumper. At this point, we have a front mount intercooler. Probably time to flatten out the brim of my hat and grab a ridiculously oversized energy drink. There's going to be some extra thread from the bolts we hung the intercooler from. Nuts are supplied to super extra lock it down. And when that's tightened up, we can go ahead and tighten up the bumper. We want to tighten it up as high as possible, and Dad Bod Gut is a great work rest. Last couple of connections to make. First on the driver's side, we'll go ahead and push that hose on. We're closing up the system for good here, kids, so please tell me you didn't leave anything inside. And last hose connection, and it was a bear. You don't have any room to twist, you don't have any length, and it's just ugly. My only hints and tips are patience and swear words. When you eventually get it sorted, it's time to go back through and check every single hose connection. It would be miserable to have to take this thing back apart because something blew off. So check every single one. And there it is, front mounted intercooler. So shiny, so cool. So let's get straight on to the next one. Smoke and mirrors intake? Get out of my car, you piece of junk. I'm not going to go into near as much detail on the reassembly parts of things, because if you made it this far, you should probably get it. We're going to go ahead and put the battery tray back in with its nut and its two bolts, and attempt to reconnect all the various zip tie hangers for the cable assemblies. And we can reconnect the ECU. Notice the positive lead goes under the connector. Don't forget to reconnect the ECU ground to your negative battery terminal. Go ahead and reinstall the battery, and then you can put your terminals on. You'll notice here that I've completely forgotten to put the little heat covering over it, so I'll get to redo this in a few minutes when I realize my mistake. Then you can go ahead and lock down the battery. Still haven't realized my mistake. Gonna redo this one also. All right, let's get to making some room for that intake. First, we're gonna get rid of the existing washer fluid jug. The various cables that run to it are kind of tucked into little slots, and you can pop them out. There's one on the front and one on the back. The jug's held in by 2 bolts, one in the front and one kind of hidden over by the fender liner. The pump itself is plugged into a port at the bottom of the tank, which is on the inside of the tank when the tank's sitting on the car. You can pull and wiggle the pump out, just have your finger ready to catch the mess. The pump is powered by a plug, and I'm going to disconnect that and reroute it a little bit. Unfortunately, there's not going to be enough wire to complete this install under the existing loom. So we're going to have to reconfigure the loom a little bit in order to reach our new washer fluid tank. Speaking of washer tank, it's going to live over here. So I'm going to get rid of the bracket that supported the original intercooler. I went ahead and got rid of it on the other side as well, because save every weight you can. The washer tank is going to hang from the 2 outer bolts that hold on the frame horn. It'll be sandwiched between the plastic frame horn and the radiator support, so go ahead and remove those outer 2 bolts. And this is your replacement washer fluid tank. It's a really nice kit. You could pretty easily homebrew something to do the same thing. I kind of wish I had, but I don't think ATM sells the kit separate from the intake. Anyway, the washer pump plugs right into the grommet at the bottom of the tank, and the tank bracket is sandwiched up by the frame horn. Reinstall your 2 bolts, and your tank is hung. But there's a problem. There's your plug, there's your tank, and you lack about 4 inches on the existing harness. So what I've done is I've carefully pulled the plug wires out of the existing harness to give it a little bit more of a straight shot and me more wire. But even then, that's not quite enough. Well then, time to kill some zip ties. The harness is relieved up in the cowl area, and you can pop a couple of zip tie restraints off of the fenders, and this should get us the last couple of inches we need for a good cable routing. So I've moved to a lower stud and done some lovely zip tie engineering to retain that. Moving down, I created a Y and taped it off with a new piece of conduit to extend the line all the way down to the pump where I can finally plug it in. Woohoo! So now we can go ahead and tighten the frame horns all the way up on both sides. The kit also comes with a filler neck for the washer fluid, and we're going to use a bolt on top of the passenger side engine mount to mount the filler neck. The filler neck drops right into place and bolts in. It's really a pretty clever design. I like the way it fits a space that doesn't hardly seem to be there, but it fits it easily. The kit comes with a filler hose that gets hose clamped to the bottom of the filler neck. The other end of the fill hose gets measured and cut to length, plugged into the tank, and sealed off with a hose clamp. I routed the hose outside of the frame rail, but I wonder if inside the frame rail might be better. It doesn't seem to be rubbing or interfering with anything, but now that I'm all done, I'm not sure. I might redo it one day. And here's a gratuitous show-off I did something scene. Look, I made a tank that holds water. Hooray! Cool, with that done, we can go ahead and start buttoning things up. I'm going to go ahead and lock down the upper radiator support. Finally, the bit I've been most excited about, the ATM Fenderwell intake. Look at that bell mouth opening. That's the sign of someone who's thought through how to do an intake. It's amazing the effect the shape of an inlet has. If you ever see a square edge on the leading edge where air's coming in, you know you've got something that's not worth nothing. I fed the intake in from the passenger side of the car Seemed a little easier for dealing with the hoses that come off of it. And then I pushed it all the way up onto the turbo. I pushed the first hose directly onto the vertical hardline. The second hose runs all the way around to the crankcase ventilation system. The barb that came with the kit was not actually the right size for the hose on my CCV, so I had to hose clamp it down to get it to seal. The last line was supposed to work with the quick connect that leads to the EGR system, but it didn't in my case, so I got rid of the quick connect and used the fitting that comes with the kit as a barb. My EGR piping may look different than yours. I'm rocking the boost leak mod. Go ahead and tighten down your air filter. It comes with a nice bag, which I went ahead and used. It's kind of a shame that something that looks so pretty is going to end up getting hidden away. Headlights can be reinstalled. The passenger headlight is squeezing the intake a little bit, which I don't like, but don't know how to fix. And finally, we can put the bumper back on. The car will be whole again. I definitely wish I would have test fit this earlier. I'm not going to lie and say I didn't have to go back and tweak all of the intercooler piping because of an interference between the intercooler and the bumper on the driver's side. So test fitting early might save you a lot of time later on. I also wonder what life cycle I get out of the plastic tabs on the side of that bumper. How many times am I really going to get it on and off before I break one of those? Time to start researching quick releases. Especially considering I think I have to take my bumper off just to do an oil change. However, we all know convenience and reliability are overrated and speed is everything, and this turned out nicely. I went into this thinking that this was a mod to support other mods, to lower EGTs, and protect the engine from the other mods and tunes I was doing. The turbo spools and builds boost, to me, so much faster. My butt dyno is on fire. The boost comes in like a bag of bricks. Next video will definitely measure what my butt dyno's feeling. Can't wait to see what the results are. In the meantime, if you like this, I sure would appreciate the likes and the subscribes. And thanks for watching.